Bienvenidos a todos y gracias por la oportunidad de ser parte de este conversatorio importante. Perdóname, pero esta sesión vamos a hablar en inglés, pero con la ayuda de traducción simultánea. So if you can, please be sure that you're clicking on the translation if you need it. Hay un botón de traducción para todos que necesitan. So vamos a empezar. Again, I'm Mike McCabe. I am the agency's senior advisor on youth development at USAID. And it just is a real pleasure to be part of this discussion today. One of my great joys in life, other than my work at USAID, is that I love to coach. I coach basketball and soccer with high school age youth. And 2 years ago, after a practice that we had, I asked my girls' basketball team how they were doing. It was around finals time. There was a lot of stress. And between my entire team, they said that they knew of 9 classmates that were considering suicide at that moment. That was pretty astounding because we live in one of the more affluent schools in the United States. And mental health is obviously a crisis that affects globally right now. And too often we're afraid to talk about it in our communities, as a community. So I want you to think about this. According to the World Health Organization, we've never seen the levels right now of people experiencing overwhelming stress, anxiety, and depression as we have in this past year. COVID and its secondary impacts on education, employment, income, food security, stability, health, political turmoil, and those with a history of mental health conditions have all combined to take what was a global crisis of mental health to a whole new level. At the same time, the investment in mental health and psychosocial support is dramatically under what we need at the local, national, or global level. When we look at the comparison of investment, for example, in HIV/AIDS prevention to mental health, it's dwarfed in terms of what we spend on mental health, even though the disability adjusted living years of impact by mental health syndromes is massive and bigger than HIV/AIDS even. So there's many cost-effective interventions, luckily, and we know a lot about what works along that pyramid of interventions that we saw in the opening session. So there's the whole pyramid of different ways that communities and then specialists can be part of this solution. And there's a lot of them that are cost-effective that can be done by parents, youth themselves, teachers, community health workers, that can impact anxiety, depression, mental health. This session is focused on the community role on mental health and psychosocial support. It'll help us discuss one aspect of this because we don't necessarily always understand the impact of stress and trauma on our bodies, emotions, and behaviors. We can often feel disconnected and lost, and it can feel like we have nowhere to turn for help, especially in communities considered what we call mental health deserts with no support around them. Despite evidence that one of the most effective ways to prevent and mitigate the consequences of stress and trauma is through consistent positive relationships with others, communities don't always have the knowledge and the resources to facilitate and enable collective healing. So our great panel today will share some of the innovations they've developed and rigorously evaluated on community-led mental health interventions. Our panelists include Tim Cunningham, who is the co-founder of Waves for Change, a surf-based program in South Africa, which has expanded globally on engaging youth from high-risk communities in mental health solutions. Anita Shankar from the Global Trauma Project in Kenya, and Dina Batrice from the Director of Technical Learning and Innovation at Strong Minds, based out in Uganda right now. Each of our panelists will talk for 7 minutes on their work. Then we're going to open up for questions. So I ask that each and every one of you take the time as you're listening to write down any reactions or questions you have. And please put them in the chat, all right? So let's get started. Tim, tell us a little bit about how Waves for Change is taking this community-based approach to a new level.
Cool, thank you very much, Mike. I'm just gonna share my screen quick because I got some slides. Let me have a quick look. How do I do this? There we go. Okay. Hopefully that's popped up for everyone. Cool. So yeah, as Mike says, my name is Tim Coneybear. I run an organization in South Africa called Waves for Change. So we combine surfing with psychosocial support services. I'm just going to walk you a little bit through our program model and what we do. We've been around since about 2010, and today we reach just over 2,000 children each week, and we run partnerships in about 40 different countries around the world. I thought I'd start with a fairly simple slide that just illustrates how we understand the young people that we work with. So we work with youth between the ages of 11 and 14. Most of them come from very difficult township environments, as we call them in South Africa. I think barrios is what they might be called in El Salvador. So they're coming from environments that are very challenging. So their outside world, the world around them, is very volatile. And they're experiencing a lot of adversity in their life. So poverty, social exclusion, these are all things that we take from our partners. The way we collect this data is we'll do adverse event screening, we do focus groups. And what we find is that as the world around the child becomes more volatile, the world inside the child becomes more complicated. So you get this kind of combination of kind of individual personal challenges and then the more behavioral kind of challenges as well. So we know that these young people, they're growing up in communities where there isn't really a health service for them. There's definitely not a health service that is focused on their mental health. They don't have health insurance to access private care. The government's certainly not laying it on. So we need to provide some kind of community-based health service. What we've learned around these community services, they need to be culturally sensitive. They need to be locally accessible. And to do that, you need to leverage social capital. And what we mean by that is we need to mobilize local people or people who live in the community to provide services to their peers. So the way we do that at Waves for Change is we will hire or we'll recruit kind of successful young people from the community, and we'll train them to have meaningful conversations with young people, to practice effective affirmations, to build these relationships that Mike was talking about just at the beginning of the introduction. Just in terms of the service that we provide, we call it surf therapy. So it's combining surfing with psychosocial support services. We have 5 key pillars to our method, and this is kind of how we've come to share our methodology by isolating the kind of key components that work. So the first thing is this idea of a consistent adult. So I think if you look at any type of health, mental health intervention, formal, informal, it revolves around the adult relationship. You can go into CBT or something like that. If you don't have a relationship with the person leading the course, the outcomes are not nearly successful. So this idea of consistent adult support, we then kind of create this access to challenging tasks. Surfing is very difficult. It builds a lot of esteem, a lot of confidence. It helps people reframe the way they feel about themselves. Happens in a safe space. That can be a physical safe space at the beach, but also an emotional safe space created by the adult that leads it. Helps young people feel that they belong somewhere, that they've got someone to talk to. And then we have these things called teachable moments. It's a curriculum that we've developed that we share that teaches young people behaviors that help them feel good. They learn these behaviors, they practice them, and then they take them home. The final pillar is creating these onward connections to the people that you meet. I think one of the challenges that we've seen in the development space is these time-bound programs. But with mental health, you need this sustained connection to keep up the confidence, the connections that you've built through a program. So these are kind of the 5 pillars of the intervention, and specifically what is then taught. If we look at the 4th pillar, which is the psychoeducation, these teachable moments, this is a simple curriculum that we give to community coaches, both within Waves for Change and with our partners. And it's fairly simple. These are games that you play, they're activities that encourage young people to practice behaviors. They might be behaviors that help them form social bonds or cope with stress, develop their sense of self, or create a sense of purpose. So it might be, an example would be teaching someone to float. You're helping them feel safe in the water, which means you have to listen to them, understand their boundaries. You need to share yourself with them and respect their feelings. And as they relax and you build that relationship, you'll see they relax in the water and they float. And what we do is we help isolate how these behaviors help us feel good, change the way we build relationships, and then we practice how we can use these elsewhere in life. So it's a fairly simple intervention. It's something that we want to be purposely simple because we want it to be able to scale. We want it to be able to live in the hands of passionate local community leaders who might not have in-depth training. They might be university graduates or high school graduates, but it needs to be simple. In terms of what changes when people come through our programs and what we've seen, it kind of speaks to that peer relationship again that Mike was talking about at the beginning of the introduction. Whenever we ask children why they come to our programs, you can imagine it's surfing, it's fun, you get to do something new, you get to meet new people. But the most important thing, the kind of key tenet that goes through every single response is always being able to talk to someone and to be listened to. So young people, if you go back to that outside world that's very complicated, there are very few people that are listening to how you actually feel. So, you know, the idea that you're isolated, that you're cut off, being able to talk to someone is really, really important. And when you put that into, you know, a surfing program or any type of group activity where the person that's convening that activity is solely focused on you and your journey and your individual experience, and then, you know, building this group around you, you start feeling very safe and very integrated. In terms of what we found these interventions to do, as you come, you know, to the beach, you go surfing, you practice some of these teachable moments, what changes? These are some of the changes that we've seen. We've measured these through various different means. We've gone for you know, the classic kind of pre-post surveys, validated scales and things, and then we've been using more kind of physiological measures, so looking at heart rate variability and how your body changes as your stress load reduces or increases. And we found that self-regulation improves and interpersonal skills improve. You know, your ability to kind of understand what you're feeling and regulate yourself, so that maybe you become a less violent person. So we often see, you know, parents saying that my child's so much calmer or more engaged at school. You have these interpersonal skills that start to develop as well as you start to, you know, learn about yourself and learn about others. The idea that you can integrate new societies and you feel more connected helps you cope with change, helps you feel more positive about the future, that you have a place in the world now. So, you know, from this relatively simple intervention and capacitating community leaders, we've managed to see some fairly profound changes in the lives of the 2,000 people that we work with. But the big challenge we face is how do we then grow and how do we share this? So what we've started doing over the last few years is sharing a lot of our curriculum, our training and our evaluation tools with partners. And that's helped us expand to about 40 different partners around the world. And it keeps growing incrementally kind of year on year. So all of our tools are open source. We're happy to share them with you. Yeah, and the slides are there for you as well. So thank you very much. I hope that was informative. And Mike, yeah, I'll hand back to you.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Tim. So I want you to take 15 seconds. Oops, sorry. Roxana, I think you need to mute. Thank you. Okay. So I would like you to take 30 seconds and think about what you just heard from Tim, and just quickly put down into the presentation in the chat any question you might have on that. And then we're going to move on to our next speaker. And we'll do the question and answer at the end. So take a second. Any reactions or questions you might have from what you heard from Tim? Excellent. All right. And with that, we're going to transition over to Anita. Anita, talk us through kind of how your organization has been addressing this from a community perspective.
Gladly. Good morning. My name is Anita Shankar. I'm coming to you from Sacramento, California on behalf of the Global Trauma Project, which is based in Kenya and builds and strengthens the resilience of community providers around the world. When I pulled up these slides this morning, I got a little, I don't know what the proper word is, teary of thinking like this is one of the usual slides that we talk about, and it's a classroom. But our children right now aren't in classrooms, but this is one example of the stories that we talk about when we're training our providers. So just take a moment to notice what you see. Remember classrooms, remember teachers and students, and what do you notice about both the teacher and the students, and particularly the student in the front? When we use this example, particularly with teachers, we ask, well, what would happen? And they point out the sleeping boy and how disrespectful that is, particularly when teachers are working so hard and often under-resourced. Oftentimes when we say what would happen next, it's some form of punishment. But then we take a step back and we say, what would you do if you knew this happened the night before? So notice what you see: caregivers fighting, the same child protecting his younger siblings in the back, possibly an uncomfortable situation for everyone involved the night before. So if you knew this was the reason that the child was sleeping, then what would you do? And chances are it would be a bit different. You could have a different approach, which is what we're promoting, a trauma-informed approach of looking at the impacts of trauma with the providers that we work with, and with kindness and curiosity, looking at what can we do, what are the underlying needs, and how can we best meet those, rather than just looking at behaviors. So our vision is to work with communities who are impacted by all sorts of trauma. That includes single incident, one-time traumas, collective trauma, historical trauma, any place where there are not effective mental health supports yet, because we believe in contextualized and comprehensive support. So to give you an example of some of the places that we work with, we had a program in South Sudan where 100% of the people had reported in our study, reported difficulty in emotional regulation. So this goes to some of the things that Tim was talking about previously. To give you an example of their physiological stress, the age of these participants were 35 years old, yet they had the heart health of 90-year-olds. So this is the impact that chronic stress and adversity can have on people's physiological bodies. So within those contexts, it is not moving forward. Within those contexts, these are our trainings. They're full of joy and laughter and singing and storytelling, because even within under-resourced communities, there already are resilient providers who, by their own intuition, are doing amazing work. And it's our vision at Global Trauma Project to properly train and support those providers in a sustainable way so they continue doing amazing work. And while it looks like it's all fun and games, it is definitely fun and games, but it's very intentional. And the framework that we use is called the Trauma-Informed Community Empowerment Framework. This is one version of it. We have multiple versions, which I'm happy to share with you, but it's a flexible framework of 6 core concepts, which gives providers a common language to talk about what they're already doing and then to address any potential gaps. In the whole framework, in the middle is the concept of personal well-being, but it's personal well-being rooted within community care. So the outside circle is one of community care. But very briefly, the 6 core concepts are safety, regulation, meaning being in charge of our energy and emotions, connection, identity, empowerment, and joy. So we support providers to lead community initiatives that address all of these aspects, and that already builds upon the community wisdom that's there and help support some of the gaps. And we're fortunate to partner with New School for Social Research for some of our impacts, which have been amazing. 64% decrease in post-traumatic stress symptoms, 26% decrease in emotional dysregulation, 15% decrease in critical heart stress. And these are results that the participants do ourselves. It is our job to create the opportunity and the container. We've been fortunate to even have 1-year follow-up, and the participants continue to improve. So we're so excited of working with communities to support them to build resilience. I'm happy to talk with any and all of you in the audience and the panel about how we further do that. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Anita. Again, I'm going to take 30 seconds and ask you to type in any question or reaction you have to what you heard from Anita in the model that they're using there in Kenya. So take 30 seconds. And in the meantime, we are going to tee up. We had a little bit of, it seems like a technical challenge. So Dina is lost connection, and her colleague Kari Frame is going to take over to talk about the Strong Minds activity and programming. So please finish putting your comment or your question into the chat box. There is no question that is not relevant to this. We welcome all thoughts and questions because that'll make for a robust discussion at the end of the next presentation. All right, Kari, welcome. And please tell us a little bit more about Strong Minds and the model that's being used there.
Sure. Thanks so much, everybody. And Thank you for your patience with me. I thought I was off the hook, and now I'm here giving this presentation as a distant second place for my colleague, Dina Patrice, who's our Director of Technical Learning and Innovations. My name's Kari Frame. I'm the Chief Operating Officer at Strong Minds. Am I meant to be presenting the slides? Does someone have slides that they can present, or do I share my screen?
You could share your screen and share your slides. That's probably easiest.
Okay, sorry, apologies. I was hoping someone else would be playing them.
We are way impressed that you're able to.
Well, don't speak too soon.
Cross connection. So thank you for being here.
Okay, let me get the right one up and go into presentation mode. Okay, hopefully you all see these slides. Okay, so I'll go reasonably quickly. Who's Strong Minds? Strong Minds is a global social enterprise. We work primarily in Uganda and Zambia, whose mission is to provide low cost and evidence-based and community-based care for depression and anxiety to vulnerable women and some men in very vulnerable communities. We use a group talk therapy model known as interpersonal psychotherapy. And we find that following our therapy that the individuals we serve are free from depression symptoms and better able to care for themselves and their families and to be productive in their communities. So I want to tell you a little bit about how Strong Minds started and why. So why? Like many other places in the world, Uganda, Zambia, some of the countries that have been featured elsewhere in this meeting are mental health deserts. There are not sufficient clinicians and structures available to address mental health in a systematic way. The mental health needs far outweigh the availability and services of clinicians. Let me just move I'm gonna minimize so I don't see myself, but I can instead see Dina's words. And a lot of illnesses, especially depression and anxiety, some of the more common and very highly prevalent mental health disorders are really very much ignored. They're seen as a luxury, especially in, I think, the global development space. The work that will come last once other work of development and poverty and healthcare has been completed, when in very many ways, I think you could argue that the presence of mental health disorders, the presence of common illnesses like depression, anxiety, are very much present and undermining those investments in poverty and healthcare. Okay, next slide. One of the things I think is really important to understand is that task shifting, the use of lay counselors, lay and peer support workers to address some of these mental health conditions is possible. It's typically quite well studied, and it's a really critical reason for Strong Minds success. You have modalities such as the Alcoholics Anonymous model. You have what we call manualized therapies or curriculum-based therapies that are highly structured, have kind of clear start and end times and phases, and session plans that can be administered not only by clinicians, psychologists, or psychiatrists, for example, but by volunteers. And in fact, Strong Minds has had great success working with individuals with secondary and high school leaving certificates, with individuals with bachelor's degrees in very unrelated fields, and with volunteers who have quite low literacy levels. And one of the things that we have found in our work is that interventions absolutely must be culturally competent in order to really fit and serve the needs of the communities where we operate. For example, in Uganda, there's multiple tribes, multiple languages, and really different conceptions of depression and anxiety and key symptoms. And the work begins in collaboration with those communities to understand that need. Strong Minds came into being in 2014. We were inspired by research that found that interpersonal psychotherapy, when delivered to groups by lay counselors who were trained for the research study, they found that the work was highly effective in supporting people living with HIV in rural communities in Uganda. That research was fabulous. It was really, it was very well done. And the implementing partner continued to do the work for a period of time. And then unfortunately funding shifted. And so Strong Minds really wanted to see the attention paid to the mental health component, and to see if as an organization we could, prioritize the delivery of the mental health care at the community level using, not a system that we needed to develop or invent, but an evidence-based model that was already there waiting for us. So I'll speak just a little bit about how we think of our model in the community. When entering a new community, our staff plant what we think of sort of as the seeds of good mental health. And so the work I described around understanding community conceptions and common language around how depression, anxiety, and other mental health disorders are understood at that level is a critical part of that first step. We take that time to begin planting the seeds of general psychoeducation and awareness. And we talk to individuals about their experiences and their neighbors and friends' experience of depression and anxiety. When enough people have been identified who are interested in participating in a group for a period of time in their community, and who are eligible based on sort of a really simple symptom scale, then our staff who are trained to lead IPT groups begin working in groups in the community. A typical group is about 12 members, and our IPT curriculum is typically around 12 sessions. And so that's the very first start in a community. Dina wanted me to highlight that this is the hard part of the phase. This is working in communities that may not have the same understanding or value around good mental health. And this is the point at which we are most likely to face stigma and resistance to the work. However, that does quickly turn after we've had a few months to really begin to work with and in support of community members who participate in the therapy. Because the attending the therapy and alleviating some of the symptoms going into remission for depression is associated very strongly in the evidence and in our experience with increased productivity, stronger social connections, decrease in symptoms. That productivity translates, if you're a subsistence farmer, for example, into more food security for you and your family. At that stage, we begin to cultivate our model and really watch it blossom in the community, which is from within the pool of individuals who we treat successfully, we recruit volunteers who we call our peer facilitators. These volunteers have to have sort of a minimal literacy level. They have to be interested in leading a group themselves. They have to have sort of some degree of communication and leadership skills. But their experience of the therapy and their experience of sort of successfully overcoming their depression is really the primary prerequisite for becoming a peer volunteer and working with Strong Minds. They receive themselves IPT training, and then they co-facilitate or co-lead groups alongside a Strong Minds staff member for about 6 months in order to mentor and practice, get pushed to kind of understand sort of what to do when faced with tricky situations, et cetera. And at that point, they continue to work in their community, serving as what we hope to be kind of a sustained and sustainable resource for mental health, for depression and anxiety, with Strong Minds providing ongoing but reasonably light touch support and supervision. And so here you see that model kind of, to the best of our abilities, visually represented in terms of there's a trainer who leads a group. Then from there, we recruit volunteers who then continue to work in the community, and Strong Minds moves on to new areas to plant new seeds. I'll talk really quickly. Of course, many things have changed about a community-based group talk therapy model under the constraints of COVID. The things that we were able to do in 2020, I think were really successful. We first understood by assessing a huge pool, tens of thousands of former clients in both Uganda and Zambia, to understand their experience of COVID and the lockdown at the time, and help to understand sort of where they were in terms of their distress and their other symptoms of mental health. We sought to adapt our model to the telephone. And so, we use teletherapy quite a lot in the mental health space. In this case, we are not talking about video chat, such as what we're participating in now. We're talking about, a dumb or a smartphone audio conversation between a group leader and a number of individuals who are recruited and welcomed into a group talk therapy session. And then we did a lot to adapt the IPT curriculum to make sure it would work for that format. It's been tremendously successful in 2020. We've served well over, I think at this point, these numbers are a little out of date. It will be well over 5,000 or 6,000 people. We've seen that a number of people found this new model and way of being reached over the phone as really appropriate and convenient for them. We had great participation rates, really strong impact as measured by the decrease in average symptom score. And individuals who participated were really enthusiastic and suggested that they would themselves recommend it to a friend or a family member. So with that, with this sort of new presence of sort of what we call kind of a digital or teletherapy model, we're really looking to see, you know, what other vulnerable communities and populations can be reached. One of the interesting benefits to a phone-based model is that individuals who might themselves be very marginalized in their communities, who might feel very uncomfortable, you know, being visibly present in a group, can very anonymously participate in a phone-based therapy session, which has been an unexpected benefit of the constraints of COVID. So I'll close with just a really quick call to action that Dina really wanted you to know about. It's really critical to consider mental health within your existing projects. Poor community mental health and common mental health disorders like depression and anxiety are a barrier to your success and to the work of other healthcare, HIV, tuberculosis, et cetera, investments. Include people with lived experiences, include users in your planning and implementation, understand how these conditions and what the needs are at the community level, involve those folks in your planning. Let us know how we can help. You've got an email address here for you. My name's Kari, and you can email me at kari@strongminds.org with questions as well as this address. And finally, in COVID times, we have rolled out a chatbot that's operated through WhatsApp. It's serving primarily Ugandan and Zambian constituents, but we'd love for you to take a look at it. And I'll close there. Thank you so much,
Kari, and fabulous job filling in on a very last minute. So we've got about 12 minutes left, and I want to go to some of the questions that have been asked in the chat. Please put your questions in the chat right now if you have any or comments. So the first one that was asked was, let's see, from Juan, and let's see, who is it from? Yeah, Juan Mendoza. And Juan asks, given the pandemic's context, how does the model presented by all three organizations address the concerns of kind of COVID protections, such as social distancing? Well, why don't we start with Anita and then go to Tim. Kari, I think you covered that one, and then we'll start the second question with you. So, Anita?
Absolutely, and we are trying to figure that out. We had done a community mapping survey at the end of February, knocking on 608 households right before COVID came to Kenya, and are so thankful for that timing. And then 2 months into COVID, did a more socially distanced survey and found that 91% knew someone who were stressed and needed support. And that was in May, so you can even imagine January. So we call it a pandemic pivot, but we have a flexible model. So how do we keep to our vision, but change our what? So we're looking at hybrid models where we have, but we don't want people completely isolated at home. We very much feel about the importance of community connection and ideally speaking face-to-face, even if you're 6 feet apart. So we are gathering people in socially distanced pods and then using the magic of technology and Zoom to do that. We're also developing an app to better support the providers so they have consistent inputs and can network with themselves. But it's one of those ongoing puzzles that we are approaching consistently.
Excellent. Tim?
Yeah, thanks. I think Anita touched on it, you know, the idea that stress goes up. I think the big, and what's the part of the program that you need to kind of scale? And for us, I think we all know it, like we've all experienced it. When you get locked down, you're just at home by yourself. It's insanely boring. But if you've also got, you know, an anxiety or depressive challenge, it's really dangerous. So how do you help someone not feel alone? WhatsApp's amazing. I mean, if you imagine this pandemic striking 5 years ago, before mobile internet data was there, it would have been an absolute disaster. But you can now get in touch with someone through WhatsApp. A message is sometimes a lot, you know, if you really don't speak to someone, sending people messages. So how we coped with it was just huge WhatsApp groups. And that has lots of issues with privacy and child protection that we had to overcome. But yeah, WhatsApp support groups, and we translated loads of guided meditations and things into home languages, and we did those. And yeah, just what was that core thing we wanted to focus on was that you're not by yourself. You have someone you can talk to, and if it's through WhatsApp instead of in person, then you know we're happy with that as a plan B for now. But yeah, it's just that human connection, trying to keep that going as best you can.
Excellent. So Kari, I want to go back to you on the second question, which was, what have been some of the barriers and how have you overcome them to implement these models? Sometimes people are not sensitized about mental health and prefer to prioritize activities that give them more immediate benefits. How have you dealt with this resistance in some ways?
Thank you. I think it's important to note that the biggest barrier to a certain extent is resources and funding. Mental health is just not included within large funding initiatives, certainly in my experience in sub-Saharan African countries. But at the community level, I think, you know, the barriers that we face are stigma and discrimination, and let me think about, and I think to a certain extent, access and availability. So the vulnerable populations we serve are struggling in some cases with food security, are very mobile. They may be during rainy seasons and planting seasons not as available and accessible. And so as we've had more experience in years working in certain communities and contexts, we've learned to be more adaptable and better able to kind of meet communities where they are, understand that there may be different seasons where therapy is more effective and more welcomed. For example, I think being able to offer a phone-based option to certain populations, I think has been an incredible boon to us, because then that captures a different segment of a vulnerable population. I think in the areas where we work, it's important to note that phone ownership and access to connectivity and to minutes is itself a really significant barrier. And in many ways, we're through WhatsApp and through others, we're serving a different population than we would have been serving a year or so ago. And so we're really looking to try and understand how can we reach more of everybody.
Anita or Tim, do you want to comment on that question? Yeah, go ahead, Tim.
Anita, after you. Do you want to
go? About connectivity? Sorry, what was the final question we were answering?
Well, it would be interesting, actually, that given that you mentioned connectivity, how is your organization using technology right now? And are we seeing, are we seeing the benefits that we think we might get from it? The WHO has started to launch a number of new teletherapy, efforts. What are we seeing with using technology, and do we sometimes overestimate its effectiveness?
We purposely went completely off technology. When we train, we have humongous flip charts. Our posters are laminated because we work in places and sometimes difficult environments. So it really has been an adjustment for us, but once again, keeping our eye on the vision and meeting the situation that's at hand. So similar to what Tim had said, we're all struggling in our individual homes, and sometimes the levels of violence are rising, even within the homes. There, unfortunately, the statistics coming out of Kenya are not good. So pointing to the importance of our work. So yes, using technology, but also not losing that community-based aspect. We feel very strongly about training and supporting the leaders that are already in those communities. So even if it's outside a bakery, people can have you know, some small conversations about stress and mental health and have some resources there. So we don't want to go completely on technology. It's a really balanced approach. So we are looking at WhatsApp and apps, but we feel very strongly about gathering people as safely as possible whenever possible.
Excellent. Hey, quickly, Tim, a lot of organizations leave out mental health and psychosocial support when they're developing programs for communities or youth. You think it's either they don't know how to do it properly or it's cost prohibitive. How do you help them to better understand effective responses and how to integrate these interventions into mainstream youth programming? And also, how are you dealing with stigma around talking about mental health issues, especially when working with parents or community leaders?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think a lot of our work recently has become partnership based, and it's encouraging partners to take a kind of more intentional mental health focus to their work. And I guess the way to do that is behavioral changes, trying to encourage people to see that there's not actually a big barrier to doing it. And our experience, I guess, from working with partners is that a lot of these interventions at a community level, they hinge on a volunteer delivering a service to someone. So there's a human element to it. So there are loads and loads of mental health benefits to most of our work that are unrealized. And we don't really need to change too much in order to kind of really amplify those benefits. Maybe a little bit more intentional training on how we engage with each other as youth, as volunteers in the field. We've kind of felt that's probably been the most impactful way to do it. And I think if you go, or we try not to take too heavy of a mental health angle, because I think there is a bit of a stigma with it still. You know, if you talk about mental health and you talk about therapy, people either think, you know, I'm not qualified to do this, or they think therapy is, you know, it's a scary word. So we take the kind of the positive psychology, the positive youth development angle, which is all about, you know, health promotion. Let's, you know, do things together, help ourselves feel better, help ourselves feel good. And you don't need to go into someone's problems in depth. I think that's sometimes the initial fear of doing a mental health program. Like, how do we delve into someone's past and how do we help unravel some of those knots? You don't always have to do that. You can actually go the other way and you can say, how can we surround them with protective factors and just focus on that? So, and that's kind of the way we've approached it and tried to get around the stigma, is that, you know, we exist to create safe spaces. And if you create a safe space, then you help people feel better. You don't need necessarily to know their entire backstory. And what most of us are doing as community organizations anyway is creating some kind of physical safe space or emotional safe space in our work. So yeah, it's a lot of training for frontline workers, simple curriculum, you know, activities they can do. So that's kind of how we've approached it. And it's kind of wrapping, it's like mental health by stealth kind of thing. So yeah, I don't know if that answers your question, but
no, that's great.
Yeah.
Kari, can you talk a little bit about that issue of stigma as well, of how you're addressing the stigma of working on mental health issues, especially in communities where the discussion of it can have multiple, you know, interpretations, and then a little bit also on how you've been mobilizing trusted community leaders to be resources to others to build that social fabric, whether by leveraging context through sports or culture, friendship benches, etc.
So, you know, I think our work on stigma and discrimination just really begins with just providing good education, you know, just providing and working with leaders to say, look, you know, we may have a conception or a label that is madness or crazy or what have you, but it's not necessarily the right one, and it's not an accurate one. And we want to talk a little bit more about symptoms and challenges that you've seen. And we'll talk to you in the way that talks about the idea that these aren't scary. And so with education, we start there, and then we really work to, as you said, sort of kind of find the right ambassadors for the program. And that's often religious and political leaders at the local level, as well as women leaders and other kind of elected officials who can promote and sort of bring on some of our key talking points in that education campaign. Our clients themselves, once we've been operating in the community for a period of time, then become our best ambassadors, because they can speak to the personal nature of their experience, and they're present in their communities. And people have understood that they withdrew, that they were isolated, that they were struggling, and maybe they didn't understand what they needed. And now our clients can speak to, sort of what they experienced and why and how they're better. And in some cases, if they've been trained themselves to be peer leaders, they can really kind of, say, hey, it seems, I've noticed your cousin experiencing this or what have you. I think in terms of kind of finding the right leaders, our experience in working with both adults and adolescents is that the peers and the users who participate in the therapy by far are our best ambassadors, but that community leaders and certainly elected officials are really vital at the beginning. And it is with their understanding and to some extent with the ability to kind of, even show them to a certain extent a group or a model is incredibly important in terms of correcting the wrong assumptions or understandings.
All right, we have about 3 minutes left to wrap up. So what I'm going to ask of each of you is, we've got people with a wide array of experiences and different areas that they're working on these issues from. What is your one suggested takeaway for people who want to start to integrate mental health, psychosocial support activities, leveraging the community? What is the one simple place to start in your mind? If you were going to say, in the coming month, if you could just do one thing, here's what I would suggest you look at, do, try, read. What would that be? Just 1 minute from each of you. Feel free to start off, whoever's ready.
I'll go ahead and start off. Oh.
After you.
Can I go? Okay, great.
Oh,
thanks.
they all want to go. Right.
Yeah.
Anita,
to realize
then Tim, then Connie.
Okay, thanks, Mike. To realize that mental health impacts the way we learn and lead and innovate and relate. So it really is a foundational measure. So think about how you can integrate it into other programs and how the impacts are already showing up in what you're doing, and listen and look for patterns and then reach out for support. There's so many amazing programs and providers, and this really is community work. So thank you.
Excellent. Tim.
Yeah, I'd start with all your frontline workers and just try and find like patient, kind of consistent, compassionate staff. I think that's the main thing. If all of these interventions hinge on the human interaction, yeah, patient, empathetic staff or frontline workers especially, if you can find them, then yeah, you'll unlock all the benefits of these programs.
Sorry.
I think those are both excellent ideas. In addition to that, I would say begin by looking within your own teams, because these common mental health conditions are there, they're present, and your teams, your colleagues, your constituents can help to put a very specific face and voice and story to what their community thinks of and understands of as sort of what these challenges are, what terminology they're using, how they're describing it. Then from there, it's about helping people to understand they're not alone. There are other people experiencing that. And that's one small step towards building a group, towards, as both my colleagues said, towards finding a great model that you can copy and bring to your community.
Excellent. I want to thank the three of you as well as Dina. Please send her our thanks for putting together the presentation. I want to thank everybody who was on here. Think about ways that you may want to reach out to Tim or Anita or Kari, and obviously many thanks to Glasswing for pulling this together. There's lots of people who care about this issue, and then there's people who do things about it. And that's what I always admire about Glasswing and literally everybody who showed up today and blew out all expectations of how many people might be interested in having this dialogue across Latin America and beyond. So thank you to Selena, to Ken, to the entire Glasswing team, to everyone who's a part of that. USAID, we are doing our best to support the initiatives that are going on this, to mainstream this across our sectors. And we look forward to continuing to hear and learn from each of you and to support you. So thanks.